Stall is the ultimate defensive Pokemon strategy, but it was once so overpowered it got a Pokemon ban. It's a playstyle where you try to be as defensive as possible. You use moves like Toxic and Recover, and games regularly go over 100 turns. In most of the decades of competitive play, it's been just another way to play the game. Instead of doing direct damage, you win by outlasting your opponent with residual damage. Admittedly, it's more annoying to fight, but it's ultimately just as valid and balanced as any other playstyle. But there have been situations where it wasn't balanced at all. For that, we travel to the lands of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire back in 2015 to 2016. Stall teams were not only thriving in that era, they were dominating the metagame. In most cases, Pokemon that get banned are true offensive powerhouses capable of ripping through a team no matter what. Just look at Mega Lucario, a Pokemon with 145 attack, 112 speed, and adaptability. Pokemon like that are so ridiculous that they warp the entire meta around them. But every once in a while, there comes a Pokemon that warps the meta the other way around. Pokemon that are too good defensively that they make Stall overpowered. The basic Stall core has Chansey or Blissey to stop special attacking Pokemon, and then an assortment of physically defensive Pokemon to stop physical attacking Pokemon. Pokemon like Aloma Mola, Clefable, and Skarmory come to mind. With moves like Recover, Wish, Toxic, these Pokemon can stay online and repel some of the strongest attackers in the game. They also have Pokemon with Unaware or Haze like Quagsire, with the idea being to stop opposing Pokemon to overcome the raw defense of Stall. The flaw of most of these overly defensive Pokemon is that they don't do a lot of damage back to the opponent. They have to rely on residual damage like Toxic to get anything done. But on a Stall team, you don't really care. You're content with playing the long game and knowing that you have more recovery and you will eventually win. You don't need to do 100 damage in one turn when you can do 1 damage for 100 turns if you know that you're built to last that long to begin with. Stall teams aim to cover as many threats as possible with their defensive core. The Chansey, Skarmory, Amoonguss, Quagsire style of core was able to cover a majority of offensive Pokemon. A majority of Pokemon, but not every single one. Now, how do you beat Stall? How do you beat a team designed to stop any attack? A straightforward way is to use something known as a Stall Breaker. A Stall Breaker Pokemon is a Pokemon that takes advantage of the fact that Stall outputs very little damage and relies on passive or residual damage. For example, a Stall Breaker could be a Pokemon with Taunt and Toxic to shut down a residual damage strategy. Or it could be a Pokemon that may be slow or frail but outputs a lot of damage. Ordinarily, if you're too slow or too frail, or you use a strategy that takes a long time to develop, you get punished by Pokemon who are stronger and faster. But Stall doesn't have those faster and stronger Pokemon. An extreme example is Swords Dance Haxorus with Mold Breaker to ignore Unaware. Another good example is Dragon Dance, Taunt, Mega Gyarados, whose Mold Breaker also ignores Unaware. Stall Breakers sometimes make a trade-off. They don't match up well into an offensive structure, but they do match up well into a defensive one. For example, that Taunt Toxic Pokemon isn't going to do as well versus a high-powered offense that is attacking you directly every single turn. Oftentimes, a dedicated Stall Breaker is a calculated trade-off. But another way to beat Stall is with positioning and momentum. That's a very abstract concept, so let me explain. Maybe the Stall player on paper has the perfect defense that can shut down all your Pokemon, but can it still shut you down if it takes Stealth Rock damage every time a Pokemon switches in? Hazards like Stealth Rock turn the table on Stall, and generally speaking, Stealth Rock lets offense beat defense. Stall inherently plays reactively. It sees your Pokemon and then switches to the correct defensive option. But that gets worn down by hazard damage, and if you get your attackers in the right spot, all of a sudden they're gonna pick up a KO that they ordinarily wouldn't have gotten. A great example is the combination of Charizard Y and Tyranitar. Ordinarily, a Chansey can completely shut down the special attacking Charizard Y. But what you do is you switch in Tyranitar to get sand damage, and more importantly, use Pursuit on Chansey switching out of Tyranitar. If you can remove the Chansey, Charizard has the easiest matchup ever versus the other 5 Pokemon. Stealth Rock damage makes the Tyranitar Chansey maneuver much easier. You didn't need an overt Stall Breaker, all you needed was a generally good offensive core, and you needed to play well. Now this is where the Stall got overpowered. Stall had 2 perfect responses to both of these ideas. The first one is Gothitelle with Choice Scarf. Shadow Tag is now universally considered as overpowered in single battles, and this is the origin story for that belief. The standard stall structure was a 5+1 structure with 5 of the best defensive Pokemon and Gothitelle with Choice Scarf and Trick. Gothitelle would trap the opposing team's Stall Breaker and trick it a Choice Scarf, thereby neutralizing it for the rest of the game. Even if Gothitelle ends up fainting in that interaction, it's okay. It did its job of removing the biggest threat to Stall, and from there the Stall team would back itself to win a 5-on-5. The trapping aspect of it made it almost unplayable. You need to bring the Stall Breaker in the game to actually break Stall, but when you do, Gothitelle finds a way in and stops you. You could use 2 Stall Breakers on your team, that way if Gothitelle traps one, you still have the other, but remember, oftentimes these Stall Breakers may make you worse versus other playstyles. It turns into almost a rock, paper, scissors contest. Do you over-prepare for Stall at the cost of other matchups? There were ways around Gothitelle Stall, but they were often quite specific. For example, at the time, one solution was to use Shed Shell Togekiss plus Tyranitar. Togekiss beats most Stall because it's a special attacker who beats Chansey. With Nasty Plot, Roost, Heal Bell, and Air Slash, it 1v1s Blissey, and Stall doesn't have a fast enough Pokemon to deal with it. When Gothitelle tries to trap you, you use Shed Tail to switch to Tyranitar and Pursuit trap the Gothitelle. Shed Shell plus Tyranitar strategies were one of the few ways to try and get past Gothitelle. These targeted ideas can destroy specific Stall teams, but they lack broad application. For example, if you rely on that Togekiss idea but run into a Stall variant with Mega Diancie, you have a terrible matchup now. Similarly, if you run the Mega Gyarados mentioned earlier to beat Stall, you lose if you fight a Chestnut Stall variant. But okay, what about the other ways to beat Stall? Just outplay. And that's where the second demon of Stall shows up, Mega Sableye. Mega Sableye has the Magic Bounce ability, which means that it reflects Taunt, status moves, and most importantly, hazards. Mega Sableye could reliably keep hazards off the field versus a majority of Pokemon. Other Pokemon have had the Magic Bounce ability before, like Espeon or Xatu, but Mega Sableye's reliability made it dominant. Other Pokemon had to make a prediction to switch into hazards, otherwise they might get hit by a strong attack and faint. Mega Sableye, on the other hand, offered a guarantee. It could stop hazards and switch into that powerful attack comfortably. Very few Pokemon can hazard versus a Sableye Mega. Clefable, some variants of Heatran, and Moldbrick or Excadrill were some of the few options. People even started getting exotic and running skill swap on their hazard Pokemon like Azelf. Stall teams would use Mega Sableye and then one more Pokemon with Defog or Rapid Spin to cover the Pokemon that can Stealth Rock versus Sableye. On top of that, Sableye Magic Bounce Taunt away from Stall, which removed another way to break it. To illustrate how strong Sableye Mega is, it's even a staple Pokemon on Stall teams in the Ubers tier, a tier meant for the strongest legendary Pokemon. Mega Sableye, Gothitelle, and 4 top defensive Pokemon became almost an unbreakable strategy. Even if you come up with a strategy that beats one variant of Stall, it could lose to a different Stall that simply uses a different 3rd or 4th Pokemon. It's the paradox of choice. Your Stall Breakers got trapped and Sableye Mega stopped Taunt and hazards. On paper, when you don't ban anything, you literally have more options, but in reality, you have fewer options because most of those options get invalidated by an overpowered strategy. There was a vote held to ban Sableye Mega and Gothitelle. Gothitelle was overwhelmingly banned, and Sableye Mega received a 52% vote to ban, but not enough for the 60% threshold, and it stayed unbanned. The main reason is that people wanted to see if Stall would still be broken even if Gothitelle wasn't allowed. And spoiler alert, it still was. With Gothitelle banned, people adapted the 5+1 strategy. For example, some teams used Arena Trap Dugtrio, others used Choice Band Weavile with Pursuit, and some even went back to the 6 defensive Pokemon strategy. The fundamental problem was that even though your Stall Breaker didn't get completely invalidated by Gothitelle, it was still tough going with other trappers. And sometimes your Stall Breaker runs into a 6th Pokemon that's built to counter your Stall Breaker. The Chestnut into Mega Gyarados example is relevant. It really came down to the idea that people didn't like the meta being a matchup fish meta, where players hope that the Stall Breaker they picked matches up well into that particular stall that they're fighting. Sableye meta was still a key issue because it shut down the ability of a team to outplay. You don't have a god-given right to Stealth Rock, but the extreme difficulty in getting it up is not a healthy thing either. Some people felt Dugtrio's trapping ability was now too strong, others felt Sableye was too strong, and there was another vote held a year later for Sableye, the more popular popular of the two. This time, Mega Sableye was banned. The Mega Sableye ban was not a 100% consensus like Gothitelle. Some people felt that its ability to constrict the metagame was over-exaggerated, but it ultimately had a very strong majority. That ended the Gothitelle Mega Sableye era of stall dominance. But stall would rear its ugly head once again in Generation 7. Gothitelle stayed banned, but Mega Sableye was unbanned with Pokemon Sun and Moon. General power creep played a part, but so did Z moves. You could put a Z move on your Stealth Rock Pokemon to muscle through Sableye Mega. Every Pokemon gaining the potential to have an instant burst of power made Mega Sableye less reliable. It was still good, but not ban-worthy levels of good. It was not a clear problem anymore. But Stall gained a fantastic new toy in Toxapex. The best defensive Pokemon arguably ever, with wonderful moves like Toxic, Scald, Haze, Recover, and a great ability in Regenerator. Toxapex was a top Pokemon, and the Chansey Toxapex Stall core was great. The 5+1 strategy was dominating the meta, this time with Dugtrio, which we saw flashes of in Generation 6. There were new Pokemon, but the fundamental frustrations were the same. The core of Chansey plus Toxapex, Skarmory, Clefable stops most of the metagame, and whatever can break that, like Choice Band Tyranitar or Tapu Lele, gets trapped and removed by Dugtrio. Any good team needs to be prepared for stall, just like any good team needs to be prepared for offense. Nobody will deny that. But Dugtrio with stall was too much to realistically handle. The concept of the paradox of choice comes in again here. Stall enabled by Dugtrio was overpowered, and Dugtrio would get banned for that reason. And around this time, people were learning. They were adapting the strategies that were doing well in Gen 7 to older generations too. As mentioned earlier, Dugtrio stall was already considered good, possibly ban-worthy before Gen 7, but people viewed it as even stronger now. Dugtrio stall took over Gens 4, 5, and 6, and so did Gothitelle stall in Gen 5. Arena Trap and Shadow Tag ended up getting universally banned almost everywhere except Generation 3, but that's a story for another day. But even now, every time a new generation comes out like Gen 8 or Gen 9, Gothitelle and Dugtrio are given a chance to see if they're okay, but they always end up getting banned in the first few weeks. The general consensus now is that trapping is almost always fundamentally overpowered. Now, in Gen 6 and Gen 7, stall is a good playstyle, but it's not overbearingly good. You still have to be prepared, but you don't have to spend all your resources just to make sure you have an okay stall matchup. Do you like stall? Let me know down below.